Let's go down to Melbourne now and catch up with demographer and columnist commentator Bernard Salt, who's in lockdown there. Good to talk to you again, Bernard.
My pleasure, Chris.
Look, you've been writing some fascinating. You always write fascinating stuff, but just lately, your thoughts, your demographic look at the virus. You've talked about the layout of Melbourne, because Melbourne is such a mobile city. It was sort of perfectly placed to spread the disease. But also on the weekend, you wrote about how the coronavirus, this pandemic, will change us permanently, and in 10 years' time, we'll look back on some things that have made life a lot tougher for us. And you've also looked at some benefits as well. First up, let's look on the downside. What damage is this going to really do to our society in the medium to long term?
Well, I think that it's linked to. I had two pieces in the weekend paper. One in the magazine where I talked about this view of the coronavirus from 2030 looking back. It's speculative, of course, but people seem to like that. And I also had a piece in Inquirer looking at the spread of the coronavirus and linking that to census data, which shows the concentration of low-skilled workers, and making the point that low-skilled workers can't really self-isolate. They can't work from home. The people who can work from home, which is another chart I had in there, were the knowledge workers. So people in offices with computers can just go from their city office to home and isolate themselves. Low-skilled workers don't have that option, and as a consequence, where you see high concentrations of low-skilled workers, you see high concentrations of the coronavirus. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating insight, and it marries with what Peter Columnist was telling us earlier, that, of course, the workplace is where so much of the infection is transmitted. You can't be an abattoir worker from home. You can't be a nurse or a doctor from home. And so people who can work from home are at a big advantage there. But also the economic damage for people there is also not evenly spread, is it?
No, in fact, there was data, three sets of data that I pulled together for that piece. The Australian Bureau of Statistics measures the number of people employed by occupation, 450 different occupations in February prior to the coronavirus, and then in May after the first wave. And what they found was that very highly skilled jobs like engineer and doctor, for example, hardly lost any. There was hardly any decrease in employment for that group, whereas there was a 15% decrease in the low-skilled workforce. The overall average was 6%, ranging from 0 for the knowledge workers to 15%. So the burden is not being shared evenly, was the point. The data is suggesting that, or showing that quite clearly, both in terms of occupations and also geographically. You won't have to look at a map of Melbourne and see that this is a northern and western part of Melbourne, also the southeast. And then it raises the question of, well, that's the case. Well, then if you go to Sydney, do you get the same degree of low-skilled job concentrations? And that is most certainly the case. The southwest part of Sydney, the southern part of Brisbane, the northern suburbs of Adelaide, are all not quite as intense as you get in the western part of Melbourne. But again, I think it goes some way to explaining why it's occurring in Melbourne to such a degree.
Fascinating stuff. There's also an age dimension, of course, because younger people are going to wear the consequences for longer, haven't got their careers established. Just very briefly, though, Bernard, you do looking back from 30 years, you say that we'll hang on to a new sense of unity.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, I hope you're right, but I'm seeing it fracture a bit.
I must say, this was a great debate on the Australia's website. People thought I was delusional. But I'm looking to, say, the First World War, 4 years of war. We lost 60,000 men diggers. And then it was backed up with the Spanish flu. We lost 15,000 people. So 5 years of absolute hell. But in the 1920s, there was a period of great joie de vivre. There was the Charleston crazy dance. There was jazz music. There was a great deal of energy and entrepreneurship at that time. So in other words, when you have real periods of calamity, in the following decade, people want to celebrate life. I think we did that in the 1950s as well. There was that sort of whole glamour.
Things are looking up. Things are looking up for the 2020s. Yeah, I appreciate that. Great. Thanks for joining us, Bernard. A nice optimistic note to finish on. Maybe the Crows will win a game in the 20s as well.